Zenless Zone Zero is the newest game by Hoyoverse, who are the peeps behind Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, and the sponsors of this video. If you've been around the channel, you may know I've covered and played both of those other titles, and was actually a fan of both, so I was pretty eager to try this one out. It's an urban fantasy ARPG with roguelike mechanics. The player character takes the role of a proxy who's a dude speaking through little bunny avatars and leading people through dangerous locales called hollows, so they don't die and stuff. The hollows themselves are ever changing and don't always make sense, like walls might not actually be walls, and turning a corner might bring you back to before the corner somehow. Not only that, but the longer one stays in the hollow, the more likely they are to corrupt and mutate into monsters. Hence why most use little bunny boyos to lead them around. Anyways, I know it's a game, but my channel is semi-known for a mix of animation with the videos, so I've got to start off this one by talking about the animation in this title. It's fantastic. It's the best I've seen from Hoyoverse hands down, and they have some pretty good stuff prior. It's honestly one of the things that kind of drew me in. Nobody ever sits still when they talk, and I love it. Almost every character has anticipation, overshooting, and resting poses for each of their movements. I am a huge fan of over-the-top character acting when it comes to animation, and almost every action in the cutscenes are exaggerated. Characters will squash and stretch, smear with spins and big movements, and constantly strike wonderful silhouetted poses. I actually went back in my footage to go like frame by frame on some of these cutscenes just to study the bounciness and impact of all these actions. Like, just take a look at this.
Don't worry, Andy. I've mastered all the rules for a surefire win from the Starlight Knights. You gotta break the rules when fighting bad guys. Open things up with a flying kick. Take them out in less than 10 seconds, and they won't even have time to play their theme song.
Behind you.
The impact frames, the camera shots, and the fun of it all, it's just such a blast. Despite the bouncy nature of everything, it doesn't even have lackluster action sequences. If anything, it just extenuates how gripping they can be. I love seeing 3D animation constantly take their characters off model, like look at these long leggies or whatever this is. Plus, some of the effects are 2D, but they keep a higher frame rate of animation instead of animating on 2s like most stylized content does. The cutscenes are pretty plentiful too, generally having at least one fully animated sequence in a story beat, and there's like 8 story beats in a mission. When they aren't fully animated, you have the basically character portraits talking, but they're still fully voiced, and sometimes you even get a comic book style of cutscene, which I'm also a fan of because look at that art. It's adorable. The main 3 that the game kind of follows, at least early on, make a very fun squad. Billy's probably my favorite because that man is just so energetic and bouncy while also being a lovable idiot. To counter his loud personality, you have Anby, who has the calm and collected one. Normally, I find the sort of monotone characters a bit dull. Like, I get the trope, but every now and then there is one like Anby who I just love. Whereas she does have the expressionless demeanor, she bounces off of Billy frequently, since despite her appearance is actually a huge movie buff as well. But since she lacks common sense, she often believes them to be real and injects tropes into their missions.
Almost here.
The monster?
The theme song.
What?
The bad guy's theme always plays before the final battle.
I'm a big fan of the whole quiet but huge nerd wanting to geek out about their hobbies motif that she has. And finally, you got Nicole as the leader of the bunch, who does her best to keep the squad together and on track, while attempting to put on a tough exterior that almost anyone and everyone sees through immediately. So, gameplay. Gameplay in this game. As mentioned, this is an action RPG. Battles are done in real time and every character has multiple moves to bop the baddies. Basic attacks are your bread and butter battle action, special attacks bop a little better and can even become powered up upon performing properly. Enemies will telegraph attacks, and if you dodge with perfect timing, you can do a counterattack to also build up your meter for more specials. With multiple members in your party, you can also swap instead of a dodge to do a flashy counter and take control of the next teammate. You only control one character at a time, but it is possible to swap during one character's longer action in order to deal more deeps while they're committed to their animation. Smacking its style and specials will eventually net you an ultimate that any of your 3 characters can use to pull off a flashy little sequence before laying out a heavy-hitting attack. You may have noticed every enemy also has a stagger gauge, which when filled will cause them to take a little sit down and pray you don't hit them, since they'll be taking 150% damage. There is also an elemental weakness system in play, as with most Hoyoverse games. Characters have detailed stat views, so you can tell who's going to be doing what. Some characters are built for filling stagger but not damage, and others hit hard but kind of ignore the second gauge. The game has a pretty quick tutorial to go over the basics, but you might have to do a little reading to understand everything. At least on the elemental spectrum, it's just fire burns flesh, electric saps bots, and ether murders mutants. The action stages reminded me of arcade games since you collect coins, go to an area, bop the bads, and then essentially get a big old go sign pointing to the next area to rinse and repeat. But the action stages are actually not the main stage of gameplay. Most story missions are done through this kind of like puzzly grid-based minigame. You'll move your character around, and when you land on certain spots, you might trigger battles, buffs, or bombs. This is kinda hit or miss for me. The puzzle aspect can be kind of fun, but it seems to sort of take a middle ground where it sorta wants to be puzzly, but not really. Sometimes it is just move around, murder something, high-five a survivor, and leave while avoiding getting run over by a virtual train. Admittedly, when I first played, I kind of thought it was a slog since I thought I had to click every screen individually to move, but then I realized I could just use WASD, and it made everything a lot quicker, and I do still kind of wish you could like jump diagonally or even click back to spaces you've been if there was a clear path. Just something to speed it up a little bit. I also feel like there should be more battles in these sections because as it stands, you'll probably be battling for like 5 minutes and probably surfing TVs for 10. Most of these labyrinths have floors and they're normally accessed by stepping on a tunnel and then moving, and I think maybe if they had a battle before swapping floors, it might spice it up a bit. There are some sequences that are a little more action oriented, like one mission had me dodging attacks from both sides in the TV segment, and I thought that was a really fun and good use of the format because every time I moved, the enemy moved, and I was dodging these like highlighted squares. It felt nice. However, I didn't really mind any of it in the roguelike mode called Area Zero. In this mode, you do the TV top-down style of gameplay, but you'll frequently be getting cards to build up buffs and synergize as you progress further and further into the dungeon, while also doing sorts of battles here and there. The more you move and the further you go, the more corruption builds up, and when it reaches 100, you get a debuff. You can also find shops, recruit extra characters, rest to heal, and other various effects by landing on certain squares. I do kind of wish there were like big action stages. Maybe there are and I just haven't hit them, but I think it would also be fun to do like a TV section and then an action section. It is kind of cool that you can build a baddie deck in the VR training area. You're limited with how many you can add, and higher tier enemies give you better rewards but require more stamina to engage with. I kind of like this stamina in this title. It might be a bit steep for others. I played a couple hours a day and never fully ran out. Made me feel like I didn't have to play all day every day in order to min-max, which was one of my personal complaints for the other titles. I know some people want to, put their whole lives into it, but I have a job. Outside of TV Town and Baddie Beatdowns, you'll be wandering around the hub world, which has access to a multitude of shops, NPCs, and a plethora of side quests. At certain points, you can even romance some of the characters in this game. I mean, technically it says you build trust with them, but that is the cornerstone of any worthwhile relationship. Too many people form relations simply based off of look, and I personally—
Headmaid Rena, at your service.
Okay, yeah, I guess I can understand the temptation of that. So when you're done making bad jokes, you can visit the best part of the game, the arcade. Currently, there's only 2 games, but I can see this being a huge pull for a lot of players. They're just sort of simple, like almost Flash-based games that you can play for free. They have achievements to earn materials to help the main game and leaderboards. There's also multiplayer modes when events are happening, but I didn't get to try any of that, unfortunately. I spent a good chunk of my time playing Soul Hounds, which was this sort of like tile matching minigame where you control a little pup who moves around knocking out the tiles to drop down others and combo things together. If any of them fall on him though, he dies and you'll respawn. A timer is also ticking, but it can be extended by collecting items. It was such a simple premise, but I probably played it for like a solid hour straight when I first tried it. The other title is sort of like a more advanced version of Snake, which I'm sure some people will really enjoy, but for me, I gotta go for the pupper. All in all, I was pretty surprised by this title. It's currently in its second closed beta test, so things are still pretty likely to change. They're also very adamant about getting feedback, so if any of this looked interesting to you, be sure to try it out and let them know how you feel. For me personally, I'd probably just speed up the TV Town segments a little bit and probably add some more actiony stages because the combat really does just feel nice. Oh, and add a lot more maid characters. You can't go wrong with maid characters. Go more.